And let's get started. Welcome everybody to this 4Ds, dreamers, doers, designers, and doubters. And a special warm welcome to you, Henry.
Thank you.
And
doers, designers,
dreamers, and doubters. Remember the doubters, right?
Dreamers, doubters.
I'm leaving you.
Thanks, Santa.
Okay, bye, Santa. Santa's the doer.
Bye. I'll see you later.
Santa's the doer. She's escaping.
I'll see you tonight, Henry.
Yes. And
so Henry, are you the dreamer?
She's leaving the dreamers.
Henry,
Santa's
are you the dreamer or the designer or the doubter?
What's that? Stefano, Santa's the doer and we're the dreamers. Okay.
Henry, I think you don't need the introduction, but I can tell a little bit how you influenced and inspired me through my career at Ericsson, working with strategy. It was very early days, and I think your book on strategy safari, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful to see all the schools, and particularly for me, I think the learning school made an impression. Yeah, but seeing the whole map, right? And then later on with the communityship, that's my passion, communities, and that we have enough of leadership. It's about communityship. And now with Rebalancing Society, that's going to be the focus of our discussions today. And the 4Ds, as we chatted before, and it's, I think your second 4Ds, right? With Ericsson before and now in this new setup. What is special, it's a conversation, right? And I really encourage everybody to have your cameras on for a good interaction. For that reason, we also will have two moderators. One is Peter, right? Peter will be facilitating the discussions, the flow, and so. And you, Kazi, hands up, will be looking at the questions that come up in the chat, and that everybody's welcome to put any comments and questions in the chat at any time. We are recording, by the way, the meeting. Hope that's okay. And why we are not talking, because you can anytime raise your hands, please have, as you're already very disciplined, you're muted. I think without further ado, Peter, can you take us into the conversation?
Yes, thank you, Geraldo, and welcome everyone, and of course, welcome to Henry. When we spoke to you earlier, you described yourself as a synthesizer of thoughts, and you're sort of like getting ideas from many areas, but then you synthesize them into new ideas. And of course, I'm sure you could also come up with your own totally original ideas as well. But you're sort of like a very well-renowned expert on organizations, and but your other passion, maybe, if I'm guessing correctly, is also around society, and you have a topic warm to your heart called rebalancing society, because you see that many societies are unbalanced. And I was thinking maybe if you could, for us here in the audience, start explaining to us what you mean by that, and maybe spend the next 20 minutes or so. Basically, you have unlimited airtime, but in just trying to explain to us what you mean and why this is important, and then we can go into more of an interactive question mode in this meeting.
Okay, I don't think I'll talk for 20 minutes. Maybe we can interact for 20 minutes about this. Yeah, my second book the structuring of organizations was called a synthesis of the research, because what I did was draw it together. It struck me that people were writing a lot about organizations, but nobody was drawing it together. And so I drew it together. And the Strategy Safari book that Geraldo just mentioned is, again, bringing all the literature together. So here I was, like everyone else, but going way back, sort of looking at what was going on in the world, even back in the 80s and 90s, looking at what was going on in the world and saying, things are out of whack. We've got to do something about this. And I attended a conference in Prague in 2000, or visited Prague in 1991, 2 years after the Velvet Revolution. And the thought in the air was capitalism had triumphed. And Kraus, who was the kind of hardcore right-wing guy in the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia then, was very down on civil society, very negative about civil society. This was a battle between left and right, between communists and capitalists, and the capitalists won. It struck me right there, being there. Sometimes just being in the context, you think about it, and being in the context, it occurred to me that's not what happened at all. Communism fell under its own dead weight. People just got fed up living in a society in which government controlled everything, controlled business, controlled communities, controlled absolutely everything. And communist countries to this day are totally opposed to community organizations because they're a threat to their, superiority, their complete control. And so it occurred to me right there that capitalism hadn't triumphed, communism had collapsed, and Western societies at that point had been rather balanced across three sectors, not two, but across three sectors. Because even in the United States post-war, the benefits to people who were disadvantaged were very generous. The tax rates on the rich were very high, and the economy was booming. And so along comes Margaret Thatcher and then Ronald Reagan in the 80s to fix it. They were fixing what wasn't broken. Unions were getting out of hand, true, but they set out to destroy the union movement completely, which is a civil society organization. And so it dawned on me that we have to talk three sectors, not two, because many countries had kept bouncing back and forth between left and right, as they do almost every democracy, but especially in Britain, and swinging totally one way and totally the other, as we see in the elections today or a couple of days ago in Britain. And so there's three sectors that are required for balance. It's kind of like a bar stool that can't sit on one leg, communism or capitalism, and it can't sit on two legs, left and right. It's got to sit on three legs. And the third leg, civil society, is a confusing term. NGOs, not-for-profits, there's all these labels, but eventually I came to call it the plural sector for two reasons. Number one, it's the most pluralistic of all the sectors, huge variety of organizations, and I define those organizations as being neither investor-owned nor government-owned nor state-owned. So they're owned either by members, like co-ops, or they're owned by no one. And many influential organizations, Wikipedia, Harvard University, McGill University, Greenpeace, are owned by nobody. And there are many, many organizations like that. So there's kind of a synthesis of these ideas. And first I did a pamphlet. Usually I have a copy handy, but I don't see. First I did a kind of pamphlet, just to sort of get my ideas down. And then I did the book here, 2015. And now I'm doing a real pamphlet. This was kind of I guess now I'm doing a real pamphlet of, I'm hoping about 30 pages, and very quickly, part one, 3 parts. Part one is the what, part 2 is the why, and part 3 is the how. So the what is what's going on. And I list all these things going on: income disparities, climate change, threats of nuclear war, just all kinds of things, executive compensation, all kinds of things going on. And I conclude by saying that what's going wrong has common cause. All these things have common cause, which is the imbalance in our societies, that they are feeding all these problems. So the second section is about balance and imbalance, and the first part is about balance of ourselves. And I kind of use Maslow's needs hierarchy theory to reduce it to 3 basic needs that we have: the need for consumption, to protect, to supply ourselves, to eat, and to be comfortable; the need for protection, and the need for affiliation. And then I argue that the private sector largely fulfills the need for consumption. The public sector largely fulfills the need for protection, and the plural sector largely fulfills the need for affiliation through our communities. And so, and then I talk about so the balance and imbalance among ourselves, because we lack either enough consumption, or we lack affiliation because our communities are disappearing, or we lack protection because the government is overwhelmed by private sector interests, whatever it is. But capitalism triumphed after 1989. It did triumph after 1989, and it's throwing the whole world out of balance. And it's throwing us out of balance as individuals. It's throwing our societies out of balance, and it's throwing the globe out of balance. And I talk about 2 forms of imbalanced globalization: economic imbalance, in which the multinational corporations, there are no countervailing powers to multinational corporations, no countervailing power to economic globalization. Nothing stands in the way of corporations essentially doing whatever they like. An interesting example is the countries of the world decided that 15% would be the base rate of taxation of corporations. That wasn't the base rate at all. It was the lowest common denominator. What it basically said is everybody come down to 15%. It's an example of manipulation, I think. So the corporations and political globalization is we have 3 superpowers that are dominating politically. Each has its own gang. I talk about a village in which a village that has no police force and weak government, and the gangs take over, right? And either they battle with each other and destroy everybody, or they come to some kind of accord. And what we have now in our global village is 3 gangs: the communist gang, the capitalist gang, and the populist gang, which is Russia, basically trying to put together a populist gang with Hungary and all those countries. And it's going to destroy us. So I'm publishing, just been accepted for publication, a piece called you all know power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. This is called superpower corrupts, and antagonistic superpowers corrupt. Absolutely. And we better stop it before we blow ourselves up. So that's part 2. And then part 3 is what is the how. What can we do about it? And that's largely on my website, which is called rebalancingsociety.org, and lays out. I used the Reformation, Martin Luther's Reformation is an example of how massive social change comes to be. It starts on the ground, doesn't start with leadership, doesn't start with the elites, starts with people on the ground, and so on and so forth. Yesterday, I met with a small group of undergraduate students at McGill, and they're going to do a course. As a course credit, they're going to work with me on rebalancing society. And the reason I want to work with them is because my target audience are people without mortgages. Okay. In other words, under 30 and over 70. Because people with mortgages or who have kids to raise or whatever, their response, they read this book, they read the book, and their response is somebody should do something about this, but not me because I'm busy. So I want to ask these undergraduates to tell me how we can reach people like them, not necessarily university educated, just people of their age, because that's how these movements start. Martin Luther was an obscure monk in an obscure German village who nailed one sheet of paper with a rant about the Pope on the church door. And that went viral in today's terms because of the new social medium of the time, which was the printing press. And his students took this sheet off the door and circulated that sheet. I don't know if you know the story. I don't believe it, but I read it. 200,000 copies were circulated within that area of Germany. 200,000 copies. Imagine, it's mind-blowing. So I want these students to tell me how we can reach them, people like them, today to start that kind of thing. And who am I to be doing this? I look around and I don't see any synthesis. I don't see any. I read Foreign Affairs. I read the New York Times. I read CNN. I look for all kinds of things. I find no synthesis. I find all kinds of pieces about we need to do this and we need to do that and so on and so forth. I find no synthesis. So why am I doing it? I'm an engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer, not a political person. I look at it, somebody's got to do it, so why not me? So that's what I've been doing, more or less. There's 1,000 things to add, but I almost did take 20 minutes, actually.
Yeah,
lots of questions. Peter, yes, you're there. Perfect.
And thank you for this. Sorry, I need to direct it. I lost my camera, but thank you for giving us this sort of like fly in or fly over of why you're doing this and what you mean with pluralism or this unbalancing between capitalism and sort of like the what did you call it, the authorities and then the plural society, right?
Yeah, the plural. Let me just mention that the plural society is the populist movement, which is a community movement, essentially. Nazism and less extreme forms of populism are community movements, essentially. So I call it I think populism in the plural sector, like communism in the private sector and capitalism in the private, communism in the public sector and capitalism in the private sector. Just a quick word that I didn't mention on Scandinavia. There are countries in the world that are balanced. They tend to be small. And there are quite a few of them. All the Scandinavian countries rate on the top of the list of The Economist as to the most democratic countries in the world. Okay, so Sweden has done its thing now, like everybody else. I'm not sure where that sits. But the Scandinavian countries like Denmark and so on are models of balance, to my mind. Very strong government, not weak government, very strong communities, and strong and proud business. The interesting thing in Denmark is the businesses are largely owned by trusts, the big businesses. They're not dictated by the stock market, which is doing huge damage. The stock market is doing huge damage to business and society.
Now you're muted, Peter.
We have a question here from Selka.
You're muted.
We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you, Selka.
I brought up two books here for, like, I was preparing a little bit for this one. This one was yours, Henry, and the other one I just started to read, and I came to the page 70, and I feel sick, and it's called The Big Con, and I was thinking, if I would put them in one of these three domains that you've been mentioning, like where these guys belong, like it's such a fantastic community power network, a superpower. So it is about the big consulting companies, McKinsey, Bain, Deloitte, Tata Consulting, and how they have infiltrated every single government and every single economy. And they are kind of a really top-down controlling everything. I tell you to the page 70. So I was kind of thinking where is your movement seems to be a counter movement to this extreme, I would dare to say, evil that is now eating up and creating the movements in the world that are not to our best, because there's a huge interest that is coming. It says The Big Con, how the consulting industry weakens our business, infantilizes our governments, and wraps our economies. So it's basically about the consulting business, and where would you put them? Because they are in the capitalism. They are definitely dominating capitalism, but they have eaten up part of the ex-Soviet Union. They have come into the China. China said stop. So I feel that there is something really, that we don't, no newspapers are writing so much about these things, but there is this hidden movement that is, I don't know what should be the word that I put about that. What's your thought on that, on a big consulting?
Yeah, it's all part of the same scenario. It's just another piece, not just another piece, but it's another look. The whole story with Gaddafi and McKinsey getting into all kinds of crap, really crap. It's quite extraordinary. I tend looking at populism and asking myself why in the world anybody would vote for Donald Trump. As a person, he's got to be the most flawed human being on earth. Somebody joked that he breaks 11 of the 10 commandments. So no matter how, and this is how he split up the American population. I think that the comfortable and the beleaguered. Or the angry. Let's split up between the comfortable and the angry, okay? The comfortable are not only the 1% and all that, but they're the consultants, they're the managers, they're the professors, they're the lawyers, they're the accountants, they're all the people who feed off the 1%. Count myself among them, because I'm in the Deshotel faculty of management, because Deshotel made a lot of money and gave a lot of money to McGill. Now, he doesn't tell me what to write, and in fact, he's died now, but I got along fine with him. But I'm paid well, partly because of the 1%. The McKinseys and many of the other consulting firms are part of that scenario, and they feed it and don't want to recognize it. So I divide the comfortable into not only the very wealthy, but the ones who feed off the very wealthy, like me, okay, and probably most of us in one way or another. And then there are the angry, and I divide the angry into the just plain angry thugs. Maybe they were beaten up by their parents or God knows what. Thugs, people who are just plain angry and are against any establishment. But more important are the beleaguered. And the beleaguered are people who may even have comfortable jobs in comfortable places, but are constantly beleaguered now by increasing mortgages, by inflation on food prices, and they're angry because they can't make ends meet, even though they have a job and so on. They live in mortal fear of losing their health in America, whatever it is. And so they join the just plain angry in favor of populist movements. Now, when I was in Denmark, somebody told me that if you work for McDonald's and you make hamburgers, you get paid $25 an hour. So you can be comfortably middle class. There was a woman, I think in Finland, who was an entrepreneur, went to the States to be an entrepreneur and wrote a book, I think, called The Nordic something or other. And her argument is that it's easier to be an entrepreneur in Scandinavia than it is in America. Because in America, if you fail, you don't know if your kids are going to get health care or go to school, or at least go to university. Whereas in Scandinavia, you know that your health care is protected, you know that your kids will go to school, you know that you'll have the basics. Okay.
We're paying taxes for that. That's a protection mechanism.
What's that?
We are paying taxes for that quite high, and that's like happy taxpayer.
Well, I did a piece in British Medical Journal and also wrote just recently, and also did a piece and also wrote a book called Managing the Myths of Healthcare, in which I argue that healthcare is not failing. Everybody around the world talks about failures of healthcare. We don't have enough general practitioners, people have long waits, or the private sector is coming in so poor people can't get proper healthcare. Every country complains in the same way. But the problem is not failure, the problem is success. Healthcare is suffering from success, that physicians are so good at finding ways to extend our lives. Look, I wouldn't be here if not for open heart surgery. Okay, it's very expensive. I had to pay $2.50 for open heart surgery because I rented a television in my room. Okay, it cost me $2.50. It cost the government tens of thousands of dollars. Okay, and the fact that I'm here means I have to see I'm living to pester all kinds of other doctors now because I got an eye problem, I got this problem, I got that problem. So I'm very expensive, okay? And we don't want to pay for it with our taxes. We want more and more healthcare services because we're living longer and so on, and better, and there are better and better services, but we don't want to pay for it. So we're back to taxes. And if you look at the figures of what corporations paid for taxes in 1960 and today, it's beyond disgraceful. It's beyond disgraceful. So yeah, we don't want to pay taxes, or the wealthy don't want to pay taxes. And the beleaguered pay the taxes, and they don't pay the taxes only in income tax. They pay sales taxes, which are regressive.
So let Johan Mintzberg, you had a question.
I had an observation sort of that builds on your observation Selka and beyond. I mean, what I like with sort of the three sectors you have is that you break the sort of the deadlock between two extremes, right? And you're extending the playground with yet another dimension almost. And that's also why we have 4D here, right? We have 4 different roles that can have a conversation around the table and find a solution. And to find out who's to blame is often not solving the problem. Even if you see someone that seems to be better off or whatever, that's probably often not the root cause of the problem. And my curious question here is sort of the 3 sectors seems to be useful when we look at the current system, right? We have an imbalance in the current societal system, and let's rebalance that. While there are also other thinkers out there that sees a fundamental flaw with the basis for our current system. And I would, for instance, say that yes, we have influencers in powerful positions, and that is sort of an outcome of the current system, right? The market drives sort of success into certain corners, and that's how it is. Do you see any if you look at sort of the 3 sectors versus the criticisms of the overall growth system that we are in, is that the same problem or is that 2 different problems? Does that question make sense, Henry?
Well, yeah. That's why I've done the newest work now on our needs for consumption, protection, and affiliation. Because in effect, we have organizations that serve these needs. And as it happens, what's called the private sector is largely an effective way of dealing with our needs for consumption. You know, this laptop, my watch, my car are all most logically, and much of my food are most logically supplied by the private sector, farming and so on, most logically supplied by the private sector. That's fine. And protections are significantly supplied by government, and affiliations are significantly supplied by our community associations. So call them sectors or call them what you like, doesn't matter. We have those 3 basic needs, and they can't blend into each other, but we all have them, and we all function in all the sectors. We're consumers, we're voters, and we're participants in community activities. And much of our much of our personal lives are actually active in the plural sector. You know, we join clubs and we work for charities and we do all kinds of things. We attend. This is a plural sector activity going on right here. Nobody's making money out of it. It's not part of government. Therefore, it's plural sector. It's a bunch of people getting together in a communal kind of activity. So we do much of our activity in the plural sector. We may work in the private sector. We may vote in the public sector. We do a lot. We're all part of the plural sector. So I think that construction is very helpful. Those 3, at least it works for me. So I wanted to mention something else. The plural sector is useful only when it acts. It's not it's useful for coming up with ideas and developing and identifying problems and all that, but it has to act. So my message to Greta, since I'm speaking to a bunch of people, Scandinavians and people in Sweden, I guess, particularly, if you can get through to Greta, you have to convey a message. It's not about sitting in front of the parliament. It's about confronting activities that are unacceptable. Specifically, and let me give you an example. there was a sit-in on Wall Street, right? But Wall Street is not a problem. Wall Street consists of concrete and asphalt. Wall Street's not a problem. It's a street. The problem were the behaviors behind the closed doors at Wall Street, and that's what had to be challenged. You know, BlackRock or whoever that make a big fuss about green energy and then go around investing in oil companies. That's the behavior that has to be challenged. That's what Greta has to do. That's why I've got my little Gretas, my students at McGill, sort of trying to do Greta, but in a tangible way. Now I don't know what Greta's doing now, so, but that's a message that has to get through. That the action starts in the plural sector. It starts with us as citizens, but not with regard to government by itself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And by the way, I call the COP conferences cop-out conferences. I guess you know the English expression cop-out, which means to avoid the problems. They are the biggest farce on earth because all these governments go there and talk a good game and then come home and make plans. So we have 4-year elected governments making 30, 40-year plans. Those plans are not worth 1 cent the day they get thrown out of office. So Obama makes a plan and Trump throws it in the garbage, and Biden makes a plan, and who will next throw it in the garbage? We got to stop doing this stupidity.
Thank you. Casimir.
Yeah. Let me just ask you, there are more hands up, but before going to the hands, let me ask you 2 questions from the chat. The first one is very simple. And you mentioned the 3 sectors, and there are some groups that we don't know where to place them because they are part of the problem and the solution as well. Where is academy and where is media? You mentioned media before as a way to a problematic situation now. So where are these 2 in your world of action?
Well, I'm really part of the academy. You're talking about universities, so I'm part of and I do what we do, which is this, and we wouldn't be here without this. So that's what I do, and I think there are an awful lot of people who are concerned about that. There are an awful lot of people on the ground protesting, as you're reading right now about the Middle Eastern situation and so on. Whichever side people are on, the point of the matter is people are expressing their outrage, and everybody's outraged at the outrage of the other extreme. So it's as if everybody on campus wants to kill all the Jews, or everybody on campus wants to kill all the Muslims, or whatever it is. There are well-meaning people on both sides who want this to stop, and there are ill-meaning people on both sides who want a good party and make trouble. So it's everybody simplifies it, they and them. There's no they. Let's start with there's no they. Look what they did. No, look what somebody did. Look what a group did. Look what a gang did. They don't do anything. Particular groups or individuals do anything. So that's the role of the academy, and a lot of movements start basically. Luther's students were students, but they reached a lot of other people who were angry. Newspapers. I'll give you a little statistic on newspapers. We have a number of daily newspapers in Canada. Consistently, every single one, with one exception, endorses the Conservative Party. Okay, it's big money behind all those newspapers, and every single one does that. Everyone. I read the New York Times because I don't think it does that. I think it tries to be somewhat balanced. What I have against the New York Times is this kind of view of the world that everything is narrow and there's no, I one day I'll publish a book called If You Don't Hear From Us in 4 Days. It'll be a book of all the things that I sent to the New York Times that they turned down. That they ignored mostly. occasionally. I at one point got so far as to have a correspondence with the editor of the opinion page who responded to me, but then he got kicked out because of a scandal, and I can't get anything in those pages. But anyway, but I don't fault them for being biased, except for being biased in favor of people they know. So anyway, that's I don't know if that answers the academy and the newspapers.
Yes, it does.
Look, there are
seems
things like Politico, and there are different sites that are trying to do the Guardian. I don't think it does it very well. I've had this is interesting. I have had major interviews in the major Japanese financial newspaper. What's it called? I'm blanking on the name. Anyway, the #1 financial newspaper and group in Japan. The editor-in-chief has interviewed me in a major story. I've had interviews in Le Monde. Nothing in the US. Nothing in Canada. Nothing. I've never been interviewed by a Canadian newspaper in recent times about rebalancing society. Maybe I'm forgetting, but so.
What I hear from you is that the more plural that the newspapers are, the better they are for the plural sector. And if not,
well, the Guardian
helping, yes.
The Guardian is a plural sector newspaper. The New York Times is private sector, but it's controlled by a family that is responsible compared to Murdoch, who's private sector and utterly dangerously irresponsible.
Yeah,
I don't
here
have an
objection.
Yeah.
I was referring to the ownership. You mentioned that in one of your blogs as well, that the more plural the ownership of the newspapers are, then the better they are in terms of the output. Let's move to another question, if you don't mind. You didn't dig a lot into the how of the solution, and except for the acting of the plural sector. And one of the things that we have considered in this group is that we could mimic something that was done 100 years ago called the Nordic schools model, which basically was enacting lots of schools in a lot of places where anyone could learn, get knowledge, be empowered to do things by the knowledge. So this empowering individuals with knowledge, critical mindset, networking, and all of that. Do you think that this can be part of the solution in the how? How do you see that happening?
Yeah, I've found that. I read about that. Somebody put me onto it. I don't know, Geraldo or yourself or someone else, but I read about that, and I found it fascinating that the secret to the success of Scandinavia, which was very, very poor when this started, was that they educated everybody equally. It's the idea of raising all the ships, which is a bullshit thing used in the private sector. Rising tide raises all boats. But this was a rising tide kind of model that raised everybody. And Finland is the truest country to that today in a way, I guess, because it pays its educators, its teachers so well. So yes, it could be a solution, but everything goes the other way. It's all money, money, money. University attendance. Harvard still accepts people because their parents went to Harvard. It's shocking. It's absolutely it's as hypocritical as they could possibly get. And will they even address it when their boards are consisting, their donors consist of those people who will pull their money if their kids aren't given open access to Harvard? Disgraceful. MIT got rid of it. I don't think it may not have ever had it. I think Stanford got rid of it. Harvard continues hypocritically.
Thank you so much. Perhaps we can continue with the questions. I think that Björn was the next one.
Right. Yes. So one thing that when I thought about this is the role of religion. I find it amazing that we tend to forget religion in the sense that what I see and what I observe is that religion, which should be, in my view, a plural thing in a secular society. It's something that belongs to a community, but it tends to gravitate to either public or private. In the US, it might be a mega church or something like that, which is really a commercial model. And you have, if you take on the other side of the spectrum, you have a total, where the church controls the government, essentially, if I take Iran as the most extreme example, perhaps. And coming from a country, and I think this is not well understood, that Sweden had a state church until very recently, and so did all the others. So that was part of the public sector. Now it's in the plural sector. But I wonder, because in my view, I think keeping it in the plural sector is quite important, and because there you get the engagement for individuals and not on how to run the state or how to run businesses. Have you reflected on that, or is that something you thought about?
Yeah, a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. Yeah, religion is naturally in the plural sector because the churches are, even if you talk about state religion, the church is not owned by government or built by government, presumably.
But they were in Sweden. They were in Sweden. Sorry?
They were? Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. But I think of religion as neither state nor private, but as you say, they can be run like businesses, like not because they are businesses, but they can be run like businesses, which is what America's had its share of, not that much of it, but a certain amount. So religion is important. Now, plural sector organizations are not necessarily positive or negative. I mean, Nazism is a plural sector movement. And the question I've always had about religion is, has it killed more people than it saved? My guess is it's 50-50. And you've got the head of the the Russian Orthodox Church totally behind Putin. How in the world he could justify that, even when the Ukraine is part of the Orthodox movement church, I'll never understand. But everybody's a whore. Anybody can be bought. And, everybody's a potential whore. A whore is somebody who sells a cherished resource indiscriminately. And so religious people can be bought out too. Unfortunately. So yes, religion, it can be like education, like schooling, and the Nordic model can be a force for change. Yeah, absolutely. It starts in the plural sector, where it can start with religions, it can start with unions. Look, the fall of communism in Eastern Europe started with a union in Poland. So it can start in unions, it can start in religions, it can start it can start against religion, but within religion, which is the Reformation, which was within religion, but against a certain form of it. So yeah, absolutely.
So Henrik Esser.
I'm in the same room as Zelka, that's why I needed to ask her to unmute. I hope you can hear me well. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure I have sorted out my head already regarding plural, private, public, but I was just thinking a bit about democracy. And I was thinking, okay, what is actually happening here? One new insight that you gave me today is that all these populistic, extremistic movements usually start in the plural sector. And unfortunately, democracies help them to enter into the public sector by becoming part of governments. Mm-hmm. And this is creating the imbalance. And I'm now wondering, how can democracies help to get balance into the thing? It seems to me that democracies are at the moment also systems that are part of amplifying the imbalance. What's your thinking about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure how because democracy is just a thing. So I'm not sure how to say what can democracy do. Maybe what can true democracy do? Because populism is a democratic movement in which a minority seeks to take control of the whole society. So Hitler was elected with 33% of the vote, and in Iran and Turkey and Israel and lots of other countries, religion has moved in and seized control of government. But it's the worst kind of religion. I don't mean any particular, I don't mean whether it's Muslim or Jewish or Christian. I mean, it's the worst manifestation of religion. It's the fanatics who do it. So religion becomes, and yet religion can be a force for decency. But I keep asking myself, where's decency in the United States? Democracy is in free fall in the United States.
And the question is, this is exactly what I'm what bothers me is, okay, democracy is now, in many countries at least, the system that we have chosen to keep the balance. And at the moment, it seems it's failing to help us keeping the balance. And the question is, what is going on here? Is it that populist movements use the public sector's financial power to enter into the governments, or yeah, I'm just puzzled actually. I don't know.
Part of it, in one way, I'm puzzled by all these people supporting Trump. But in the other hand, if you add up the people who are angry with the people who are beleaguered, you've got populist movements. Look, I'm comfortable. I don't have a mortgage. I own my house. I have sufficient money and all that. I'm not beleaguered. I know where tomorrow's dinner is coming from. If I'm holding a job, a regular job, a middle manager, whatever, I'm making reasonable money, but I'm stuck with mortgage rates that are going up. I can barely deal with the food costs going up. I'm angry. So what am I going to do? Biden's not serving me. Well, the establishment's not serving me. So do I do something stupid and vote for Trump and not realizing I'm going to make it worse? I don't think it's hard to understand. There's an article, I think today I read, or yesterday, in the New York Times about Macron in France. He represents a kind of very establishment kind of position. And there are a lot of people who feel that life is tough, and who's looking after us? Look at Britain, of all things. My God, look at these recent elections in which the Conservatives, the local elections, which the Conservatives were almost wiped out. They were just humiliated. People are angry. And the trouble is, look, let's go back to Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic, okay? In the 30s, it was among the wealthiest, most democratic countries in the world. Then the Nazis came in and thrust it to a form of populism, but not their populism. Then the communists, then the Russians came in and thrust it to their form of communism. And then what's his name from Columbia University, the economist from Columbia University, came in with the Americans and said, it's okay, it's going to be fine. Capitalism is going to rule now. And that's not working very well for them. And so what are the people doing? They're going to a form of populism, and every one of these countries has very strong populist movements. It doesn't occur to anybody to vote for balance. It doesn't occur to any party to offer balance, because the centrist or left-wing parties, or not, I don't know about the left-wing parties, but the centrist parties largely represent establishment forces. They're not for big business as such, but in so many subtle ways, they're undermining their own middle class. And so the middle class looks and says, who's representing us. So we need balanced parties. We don't need populist parties or, you know.
Thank you, Henry. How are you for time? Do you have time for some for the last questions, or do you need to step away?
I'm having a good time, so I'm fine for time. And
All right,
you're an
then.
interesting you're an interesting group. So
thank you. So Migo.
Okay, you can hear me now, I guess. Yeah, good. No, I'm just got to think about. So when you look at history here in Sweden, so as you said, in the 1850s we were the poorest in Europe. We and Portuguese were the poorest in Europe, and then in very short time we became kind of the richest in the world. And one part of this, from this what they call plural sector, was we talk about that the civic society, we talked about the four people movements in the 1800s, which was the workers movement to get better salaries and work. It was the non-alcohol movement, so to kind of build a society where you take care of each other and you don't drink any alcohol. It was the free church, which was about freedom of religion and having their own way of interpreting, and local churches and so on, against this state church then. And it was the women's movement. And then when we learn history here, we talk about those four people's movements as like one driving force for change in the civil society. And then that combined with industrialization and steam became kind of the engine for the change of society to become one of the richest in the world in very, very short time. So I was thinking part of that, I think, is this plural sector, the four people's movements, was about getting more food and getting better physical life. So that's part of the kind of getting the food thing, but it also can be learned from that time, because that actually engaged a lot and created a lot of change in the society. This is in the end of the 1800s. What's your reflection on that? Because I got to think about that, the way you are dividing the sectors.
well, it's interesting because I have tended to focus on the Reformation or the American Civil Rights Movement or the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. But I just made a note while you were talking. I really need to look at that carefully. We all need to look at that carefully because anything that might have worked for any reason should be looked at as a model, as a potential model. So yes, and please send me anything that it's just henry.mintzberg at McGill, mcgill.ca. Please send me anything that will inform me about that, or your own thoughts. Migo, too, if you have on how I can use that as another example, and we can all use it as another example of how you make this kind of change. We don't have very many good models, you know. I read Harari, and he kind of says almost seriously that we made a big mistake when we left hunting and gathering to take up agriculture. He kind of says that. And the reason is that we are an indifferent species. We don't care who we ride roughshod over, whether it's each other or other species or anything. Then along comes Pinker at Harvard, and he says it's all about progress, you know? Progress is the answer to everything. And he kind of almost even dismisses nuclear weapons, you know, because it's all nuclear reactors are better than nuclear weapons, I guess, for him. And then I come along and talk about balance or imbalance. So we have millennia of indifference, centuries of progress, and decades of imbalance. And when I put it together, I conclude that the indifference has been undermining us steadily, and leading to the imbalance that's in the process of destroying us, and the progress has been feeding the imbalance, the negative side of the progress. Like, you know, Steve Jobs is a brilliant guy. I mean, look at this, the greatest piece of technology ever. And what's it given us? It's given us the social media that are being manipulated every which way.
Thank you. I also, on that note, I have a quote that says that when standing at the edge of a cliff, a step forward is not necessarily progress. So it definitely needs to be balanced. Selka, you have another question, and then it's Yahya.
I don't know if it is a question. I almost forgotten that I raised my hand. I raised it whilst Henrik was talking, but now Micke Goldberg put my thoughts on something else, so that I can use the opportunity while I have it. Being a foreigner in Sweden, Henry, I'm coming from ex-Yugoslavia, and that had a very, very interesting model. And I think that it will be really interesting to see what has destroyed Yugoslavia, because we had a very, very interesting distributed cellular division and the organization of the country. And I think that that should be studied. But at the same time, me coming to Sweden, what I have observed here, being the foreigner, is this fantastic organization of the pluricide. And used to say, if it would be a war in Sweden tomorrow, you would be within a let's say one day you would organize complete country, because these guys, and you guys probably are not aware of that, you are the master of organization. Because there's, all this, the sports movement, the culture movements, they're all coming from the individuals who wanted to make contribution to the society. And what is the status in Sweden? It's not the latest car and the biggest car, but it is actually your social engagement that gives you the status symbols, so to say. And I have 3 kids, and I have been observing that, and I cannot tell you how much of the leadership and organizational I have learned on that side activity, how serious business it is, because the people are really driven by the purpose, because the purpose is their kids feeling good, having meaningful activities on the side. So that is something, and that is the factor that creates this balance in Sweden. That's at least my observation, being a foreigner for a long time now.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. Worker co-ops in Yugoslavia were the alternative to communism, and it was plural sector basically.
Yes.
Whereas the communist countries were state controlled. Yugoslavia had this whole mixture of worker co-ops that kept it that way, and held together people who were quite different, I guess. Now, as far as what you say about Sweden, let me mention another country that might surprise you, and that's Brazil.
Yeah, it does not.
The plural sector in Brazil is phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal. The ideas, the creativity, read the story of how they dealt with the HIV/AIDS crisis. It was the 3 sectors working together. But there were all kinds of plural sector organizations of homophiliacs and prostitutes and all kinds of people. The state got involved and forced laboratories to come up with alternatives to the medication that was being charged obscenely for the medication to treat the people who were infected, and the World Bank told the Brazilians they'd never deal with it, and they dealt with it better than anybody on earth. And when I go there, I'm amazed at the plural sector organizations and the ability to organize. And by the way, historically, the Americans are the great organizers.
Yes.
But now it's all focused in business.
Thanks. Maybe the last person to have raised the hand is Yahya. Welcome.
Thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be here and to meet you, Mr. Mintzberg. I'm a big fan of your work, and it's for me an honor to be here today. I'm basically part of several think tanks in international relationships and geopolitics in the MENA region. And the beauty of this exercise is to understand the past, to see how we can predict the foreseeable future, doing a holistic analysis, holistically, culturally, economically, politically. And two minor questions, if you don't mind, Mr. Mintzberg. First, rebalancingsociety.org as a movement to build a balanced world. How do you see the impact of this initiative in the international relationship? We separate the global order, the regional orders, and the local orders or the national orders. So for the global orders, how do you see the impact for the G8 versus the extended BRICS, or the West versus the rest, or the China versus US? On the regional order, we see, for example, that the regional orders are taking power from the national orders. In Europe, the European Union, there is big debate on who will take the power versus the national, sovereignty. And there is big debate in France, in Italy, between the regional order and the local orders. And last, which is the national and the local order, where we see, and I fully agree with you, that the democracy, which has been defined by Bill Clinton as the law of majority, the respect of minority, the state of law, and the human rights, it's played as the center between left and right. And we see that in the past, for example, in France, there is no left, no center anymore. Macron, in 6 months, built a new, political party and won the election, and there is no, counter power in the opposite. If there is a new pest, but it's not real counter power. And we see this in the UK as well, with the rise of, some new, third parties as political. So how do you see the impact of rebalancing the society as individual, as group of individuals, on local, regional, and global order? And last question is, in the foreseeable future, I think the main game is the quest of universe, and there is big quest of universalism that rephrase it. So we see that the end of history, and the guy from Colombia, which is Francis Fukuyama, after the end of the bipolar world and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 89, and the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1891, we entered in an era till 2021, which is the COVID and the Great Reset, where it was more the hyperpower and the West were leading the world. And I think the rebalancing goes hand in hand with the global leadership, and how China, Russia, the old empire are coming into the game to see, okay, we have another view on, the models, political, economic model, ideological model. And I think rebalancing should be basically, we are in stage where things are moving. We don't know what they are moving. And what's your view on will be the world in 20-25 years?
Well, in 25 words or less. There, on the last point, to start with the last point, there was a very astute Dane who said that I never predict, especially the future. We have no capability of predicting discontinuities. We can predict regularities. So I can tell you there'll be snow outside my window in January. But I can't tell you what the next crazy thing is going to be in the world, because it could be anything. So, to my mind, optimists predict what they like and pessimists predict what they don't like. So let's leave that aside. But as you say, learn from history. As you were speaking, I thought maybe organization is the problem. That organization means establishment. Organization means power and influence and position and leadership and all the rest. Whereas these movements are kind of spontaneous, grounded things that are quite different. So maybe organization is the problem. in some ways. And the counter to organization is at the local level. I don't mean local government. I mean local movements. Maybe we need 1 million movements that consolidate into one movement. But nobody's going to sit and orchestrate a global movement. What people are going to do is move on the ground in their own place. It started in a village in Germany with the Reformation, spread to other villages, then it spread to Switzerland, spread to Britain, spread to other countries, and led to the Reformation. I think so. I think the local level is the important level, and maybe the small countries do best with democracy because they almost are local. It's easy for I don't know if it's easy, but Donald Trump can get away with it among 350 million Americans, but can you get away with it among 5 million New Zealanders? It's too close. So who knows? I don't know. But you mentioned a number of countries that have shockingly gone, to the right or center right or so on. But look at Israel, and look at the founding of Israel, and look at Israel today. The labor movement is gone. The kibbutzim are unheard of. I don't hear anybody talking about the fact that the attack on October 7th was against kibbutzim. And I wonder about Netanyahu, who cannot be a fan of the kibbutz movement because it's always been a left-wing movement. Is he saying, let them sit there because they're all kibbutzim? I haven't heard anybody say that. I wonder.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's end this with letting Casemiro on ending question.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much, Henry. Very interesting conversations, really. And in your pamphlet, you're saying that now it's up to the plural team to act. And in your Rebalancing Society, you talked about 3 ways of acting, like acting through affiliation and our fits, acting through ballots in the voting, and acting through government. So how can we, acting through our wallets towards public, private, and acting through votes through public. How can we enforce better governance and accountability from these ones, from the public sector?
Well, everybody votes with their wallet every time they walk into a store. So you choose where to shop and with whom to shop, and with what kinds of organizations are you going to put your money. So we can, we vote with our wallets, we vote with our ballots, and we vote with our feet when we march or when we challenge behaviors. These are all examples of grounded kind of movements. If you want to see something, I kind of like this on Rebalancing. If you haven't looked at this, on rebalancingsociety.org, under the tab called Action, I think it's called Action or Acting, there's a table.
Acting.
Acting, and you can see a table there at the bottom, and people kept saying, yeah, but what can I do? And every time I answered, they say, yeah, but what can I do? And so I collected all the what can I do's together into this table of what can I do as an individual, in a community, in my company, in my government, globally, and what can I do to challenge what's wrong? What can I do to create what's better? And so on and so forth. So it's a kind of collection. It's a synthesis of everything I could find and think of. Kind of a fun thing to look at, I think. It would be fun to get together again. Maybe you might mull this all over, and maybe we get together and pick up from what you conclude. But this is good.
Yeah.
I'd like to adopt this group as a kind of a little kind of steering group of one sort, one kind of steering group.
That's lovely, Henry.
Definitely. Geraldo, please say thank you to Henry and wrap it up for us.
Yes, thanks so much, Henry, and inspiring as always. We want to be adopted. So many thoughts here. Like the first question: when is the manifest being published?
If you asked me 6 months ago, I would say 2 years. If you asked me 2 months ago, I would say 6 months. If you ask me now, I would say 8 or 10 months, because I'm having trouble with section 2, and I was working on section 1. I did it so quickly that I thought, oh, good, I'll just breeze through 2 and 3. 2 has been driving me crazy, but I've finally got it pinned down now. I was working on it this morning. And section 3, I think, will go easy. So let's ask a different question. When would it be ready to look at? I hope 6 months, let's say. But, section 1 could be ready to look at in a few weeks if I cleaned it up. So parts of it could be ready. I don't want it to circulate in rough form too widely, but I could start sending it out. It doesn't, because what's published? The other question is what does it mean to publish it? I spoke to a very prominent woman in publishing in the UK, and she said, well, how do you sell pamphlets? Doesn't stand out on the shelf. So I said, well, you pile it up at the cache, right? But of course, everybody wants to be piled up at the cache. So maybe I should just do it electronically exclusively. That's a thought, or just at least emphasize electronically, even though we do it physically, a public, print publication. But does anybody know about indignez-vous? It's one French word I have so much trouble pronouncing. Indignez-vous. I think that's the right pronunciation. This was a pamphlet that was done about 10 or 15 years ago in France on a similar concern, but not very well done, I don't think, but on a similar concern, that sold 900,000 copies within a year and 4 million in Europe within a couple of years or something. So there's a market out there, a need out there for this kind of thing.
Henry, thanks so much. Two final things. We have the next 4Ds coming up 7th of June, so you're much welcome. And Eric, you'll be the guest, right?
Sure.
And also, I'm just thinking, do you have any few words? What's it going to be about?
It's a bit about rebalancing your life, your love life, your planetary footprint by doing a little big thing with having potatoes. Potato.
Good. Balance yourself. Yeah.
And then the students that you are in pre-mortgage phase, so have a lot of post-mortgage people here in our community. So maybe we can find some good connections there.
Yeah. We put them together with each other, the grandparents with the grandchildren. What a coalition.
Excellent. Any final words, Peter, Kazi, anybody in the group?
Oh, I think, Henry, you have been extremely generous, both with your thoughts as well as your time. And also, I'm super grateful for everyone showing up here and participating in the discussion and leaning in. And I'm looking forward to many more of these sessions and let's try to have this as one activity and and as a way and means for us to start making a change as well. So again, thank you very much, Henry, and for everyone else, looking forward to see you again on the 7th of June.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you all.